Welcome to Vibrant Living Conversations. I'm your host, Gemma Putty. As a life coach to midlife mamas and women, I'm excited to bring these conversations from North Idaho and across this region to support you on your journey to vibrant living, glowing from the inside out, fully in your own true to you power. For this interview, I am talking with Carlynn, hormone health consultant and owner of Carlynn Christine Wellness. I'm thrilled to have her here today to learn more about her approach to health through a mineral mindset and how she helps women conquer their health goals. So welcome, Carlynn. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, so honored to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this opportunity.
Yeah, my pleasure. So let's dive in. What's your elevator pitch of the work that you do with women?
Yeah, so I am a hormone health consultant that supports women to get to the root cause of their symptoms or imbalances, ultimately through a lens of mineral metabolism and bioenergetic nutrition. So I'm really, really passionate about just empowering women through, or empowering women to move through each stage of womanhood with confidence and ease. And I really believe that health is actually super simple. But it's just very convoluted and complicated within our modern day context. And so what I really try to do is simplify health and wellness, ultimately through educating women on female physiology and cellular health. Again, through a lens of bioenergetics, which really just comes down to how our cells operate and are they nourished and hydrated, because they are the energy source of our body. And without our cells working optimally, the rest of our metabolic system doesn't work well. And so that's kind of the root cause approach that I take.
I love that so much. It's so interesting though, because like you said, the world that we live in and all of the stories that we're told as we're being like growing up, especially our generation, it seems like the things that I was raised to think about food and nutrition and calorie counting and low fat and vegetarian, right? There's so much stuff that like even as you and I've worked together, I'm like, this is simplifying, but it's also changing my entire world on how I think about food, how I define health, how I'm looking at food. So I'm curious, what is your story to getting yourself to this place? And what was the framework or the systems that you learned all about what you teach today?
Yeah, so I mean, it really comes down to the fact that I had a debilitating cycle for
Okay.
my entire teenage and adult life. And through a very intense physical injury, I was forced to kind of rebuild my body. And through that, I wanted to better understand why it is my body broke down and why I had dealt with such a debilitating cycle my whole life. And that's when I just started to really learn about what it meant to be a human and what it means to be a female human.
Yeah.
And so that really took me down the track of learning about female physiology, learning about the menstrual cycle, really understanding what it means to provide nourishment for the body. And that led me down deep diving into nutrition and hormone health. And even when I did eventually heal and mend my cycle, there was like a piece of the puzzle that was still missing. I was like, okay, I have this understanding of hormones. I have this understanding of female physiology, but what is driving hormones? What is driving hormone imbalances? Because it has to be more than just nutrition. And also nutrition is kind of a convoluted term as well.
Totally right.
As you start learning when you go into the nutrition field. And so there was just a piece of the puzzle that was missing. And I started to learn from a couple of different resources online about this concept of minerals. And really learning that minerals are the framework and are the foundation for how our cells create optimal energy, which ultimately is what runs our hormonal ecosystem. And so I ended up going back to school and doing this online program that really dived into mineral metabolism and cellular health. And that's where I learned about the concept of bioenergetics as, again, that foundation to running the whole metabolic system of the body. And that was the eye opener for me. I was like, yes, this is the root cause approach. This is the lens I have been looking for.
Yeah.
And that has transformed my own health and healing journey in a whole new way. It's given me a whole new approach on how to really support human physiology, and has enabled me a business framework that I feel simplifies things for people.
Yeah.
And it also gave me that missing link between, okay, what truly is nutrition when it comes to human physiology? Because we can say that all of these foods are good for us, but why are they good for us? How are they getting metabolized in the body? How are they properly getting absorbed? And what are all of those pieces that enable us to actually get that level of nourishment? And so that, in a nutshell,
right.
is kind of the story.
Well, let's dive in a little bit deeper. So I can see people being like, minerals, like what exactly are you talking about? And then bioenergetics, how would you define that? Will you break those two down for us a little bit more?
Yeah. So when it comes to minerals, what I'm talking about is nutrients. So the nutrients that we get from our food or from soil, actually, soil health. So things like magnesium and calcium and potassium and zinc and all those words that we've heard of. But what they're essentially doing is they are the ingredients that supercharge our enzymatic activity. And that's what really creates the various biological processes in the body. So how we activate those enzymes to create those processes in the system are through minerals. So they're what's considered like the spark plugs of the body. They turn things on to make things happen within the system. And when it comes to bioenergetics, ultimately what that means, it's the energy source of our biology, which really just comes down to our cells. How our cells function is based off the minerals that make that cellular respiration, that energy production, actually happen in an optimal way. Does that break it down?
Yeah, totally. It's so good. It's so well. And I should even back up, because the way I even found you was because I had gone to the doctor with my, at the time, she wasn't even one, I don't think, my daughter, and they had said that she had low iron. And then I went on to this mom's group and was just like, low iron. They wanted to immediately like test her blood and then give her a supplement for it. I'm like, she's barely one, like she's barely eating. Like, why are we drawing all this blood? And then I'd heard from another one of my friends, health friends, that blood isn't necessarily the best way to even test that. So it sent me down. I just went onto the mom's page and I'm like, help, has anyone heard of this? Like, and my nieces are on iron supplements, and not supplements have a place to a point, right? But I think more and more over my journey, I'm like, but how do we get it from the food, from changing our lifestyle? So we're not, because I think with supplements too, you and I've talked about how well, some of them, how well is your body absorbing it, what's in them, like that opens up a whole nother rabbit hole. But so it started with Matilda, which then led to me being like, I'm basically 5 years postpartum between having my 2 kids and figuring out what it means to be a mom and living for myself first so I can fill my own cup before I come to my kids. And then you're like, I have this program where you can get it was a hair test. This is not even blood. The hair test, which then leads you into understanding where you are with the minerals and your coaching to be able to be like, here's the 3-step protocol to start with to get your body back into balance. So that's the background of how Carlynn and I found each other and figured out basically that my body was very depleted in a lot of things, which may be to be expected, but also like in retrospect through the last couple of years, understanding that I mean, even hydration and electrolytes are something that you're so focused on. And for me, electrolytes had always been something that, you know, I've run marathons and I was a runner, but that was a different chapter. So I wasn't really thinking of electrolytes in this part of my life. I was like, I drink plenty of water and tea, like I'm fine. So that I had so many ahas, and I'm still having so many ahas through this of looking through the lens of minerals, electrolytes, the cellular activity, and then backing up into what real foods and real foods is. That's a whole nother thing. Like, how are we defining that into what are we putting in our body to fuel us, to give us those nutrients, and see everything that we're putting in our body is like it's supposed to be there for a reason. How do we, yes, enjoy it, make it ritualistic and sustainable, but have it add value to our body and our systems for us living in this toxic, crazy world that we live in, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you knew as a mom intuitively that that approach that the practitioners were offering you just didn't make sense. And
Right.
that in itself is super powerful because we really do, especially as women, outsource our power to external agencies and forces. And
Right.
when we start to return to what we are able to understand or intuitively know, that's where those aha moments start to happen. That's where that pathway of empowerment starts to happen, and where we can really start to make changes on our own for our families. And I really try and empower women with is returning to that intuitive ear, because you know your body best and you know your children best. And so that is, to me, what was so inspiring about you, is because you knew that something was not right and you just wanted to get some more information and education from others. And so I was really happy to have worked with you in that way.
Likewise, totally. And I think too, I keep having this conversation, but here in like midlife, like we've lived, right? We've got a few decades behind us. We've like fed into these stories of low fat or vegetarian. We've had hormone imbalances in whatever way, shape, or form it looked like for each woman. And at this point, I don't know about you, but the calling to come back home to self, to go back to that intuitive calling, it's it's hard to start with because you've been so fed so many stories. But once you step into that, they're just things from the world, right? It's just like the food industry trying to sell me a ton of this, and they're just trying to make money. They're trying to do their thing. Like coming back to, wait, what do I feel like is right? How is my gut responding? How is my skin look? How is my energy levels? How is my sleep? And going back to those notes that your body's communicating with you and trusting them, right? Not going to your doctor and looking, flopping on your back and give me the answers, right? Because that is the way the world, that's how we're taught in a lot of ways, right? Like even the convenience, the drive-throughs, there's a lot of glamour put on that, but ultimately that coming back to we are the only ones that are in these bodies listening to all of the things going on. Like we get to come home and figure that out for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you made a really good point about how you are in this midlife position, and you're starting to also put together how the different chapters of your life have led to where you are today as well. And that's the thing that I do work on with clients. It's really understanding kind of their stress timeline, because when we understand what our stress timeline is, we start to be able to map out how it is that we have gotten to a place of potential depletion and dysregulation. And when I mean stress, I'm not necessarily meaning the emotional, mental stress that a lot of us correlate.
Right.
You know, it's more of environmental stressors. And, you know, did you have pregnancy? Was that, because that's a huge physical stressor. Postpartum is a huge physical stressor. And then of course there's the layers of the emotional and the mental, but we don't always think about the environmental stressors. And all of those start to add up and they layer upon each other. And any form of stress, no matter the source, is going to deplete you or use your mineral reserves. And if that starts tackling on top of each self and you're not replenishing yourself or knowing how to replenish yourself, then that's what eventually leads to a lot of the issues that we see women dealing with when it comes to hormone imbalances, when it comes to metabolic issues and disease. And so it really, that is a large aspect of what I do try and empower women with is that understanding that when we start to build that mineral foundation, it's going to create a level of metabolic resiliency, because we can't get rid of stress. Stress is always going to be a part of our lives, but we can be in more control and have more of that power in terms of creating a system that is more resilient to that stress, so it doesn't deplete us and set us back in terms of our health. And so that's the biggest platform that I really utilize when it comes to minerals, is creating that mineral foundation so that we can create that metabolic resiliency.
Will you talk about how you work with women, the type of, I mean, I'm sure you're working with women, even between my mom and I both came to you, obviously it's separate, but like my mom and I are obviously different parts of our lives, but are you seeing a common thread? And then just even what can people expect when they're working with you? You know, if someone's like, oh, maybe this is right for me, how would you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of talked about it earlier when it came to electrolytes, right? That is probably the most common theme I see with any client and individual, is there's electrolyte dysregulation. And when I mean electrolytes, what I'm essentially referring to is magnesium, calcium, potassium, and sodium. Those are our major minerals. They are what set up the foundation for the rest of our nutrient status. And so if there's dysregulation of our electrolytes, our other nutrients are not going to get metabolized properly. They're not going to get absorbed well. And there's going to be dysregulation in turn because of that electrolyte dysfunction. So the first step is to get that level of hydration on a cellular level by really focusing on those electrolytes. And that doesn't necessarily mean taking a powder from a packet that you buy at the store. That comes down to good quality salt, which is an essential superfood that has a plethora of trace minerals that we have very much lost in our food system. Not to mention the fact that many of us have grown up as an anti-salt culture. Potassium, which ultimately has to come through whole foods. But because, again, we have been programmed to believe that carbohydrates are bad, and many women subscribe to a low or no carbohydrate diet, we miss out on a major mineral and electrolyte that powers our cellular health, potassium. And when it comes to calcium, there's also a subscription that dairy is bad. And so we lose out on a really, again, a superfood with really bioavailable nutrients that ultimately helps us get in that really good quality calcium. And of course, calcium comes from other sources of food as well, not just animal foods, but we really don't get enough of it through food sources. And you know, magnesium, as we've talked about, is one of those major minerals that unfortunately has been so depleted in our soil. That usually is one of the nutrients to supplement with. But of course, there's a multitude of types of magnesium, and the type of magnesium that is appropriate for the individual, you know, that can be a little bit overwhelming for the individual. And so, when I do look at a hair test, that's kind of, again, the first step that we're taking, but it does largely come back to, okay, where can we get these nutrients from whole foods? How can we make this the most realistic for your lifestyle and your situation? And what is going to enable you to create this sense of nourishment and hydration on a cellular level? So that's ultimately that's the common theme I see for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, and you break it down so well too, because from the second that I met with you, you really just explained it so well. And it's just a step-by-step natural process. Like, I hate to say it, there's no one pill solution here, right? Like, we don't want there to be. It is a step-by-step nurturing yourself, listening to yourself, incorporating in your magnesium spray and your high quality salt and these little things in a way that, again, feel sustainable and appropriate to your daily life, right? I've been sitting here or standing here as I am now and with like my feet in a boron, borax, magnesium, right? Like, and I'm like, I'm at my computer a lot of hours a day. So if that's when I can incorporate that and like absorb so much awesomeness into my feet, like, and my toes had issues before. So now I've felt it in so many ways. And it doesn't feel, it's just like a few more minutes onto what I'm usually doing by standing here, like the magnesium spray. I brush my teeth every night or every morning, both, right? So I'm like, my magnesium spray is right there. So I can just incorporate it into what I'm doing. But you give the step by step, the build up, because I came in, I think the iron and the copper, you're like, yeah, but we've got to like build up this the basis before anything else will be absorbed or we can even get there. And it might regulate out once you take care of the basic elements, right?
Yeah, I mean, we just have to get those electrolytes in a more stabilized place in order for us to then move on to the rest of our nutrient profile. And that will naturally shift how our other nutrients are being used. And the copper iron topic is that does require blood labs. That are those are two nutrients that you specifically do have to look at blood in order to truly understand, and they will also impact your electrolyte regulation. So there is this relationship that happens, but starting with a hair test can always be a good first step because it does give insight into what's happening on a cellular level, and we can start to integrate small little steps to really get the individual to start feeling a little bit better. And once they do have that level of balance to some degree, then we can start to dive in. But it does take little steps to slowly introduce things to the body so that we're also not overwhelming the system. And that's the biggest thing I find with a lot of people who are doing what I'm doing, a lot of practitioners in general, they overload the client with all these different parts. The system's not in a place to handle that, and it's just going to add more stress. And so it's really about these minimal, easy steps that are realistic for the client so that things can start to shift internally, and then we can build from there.
And physically overload, but for me, it's like been mentally and emotionally overload. Like I have to take this one step at a time. I'm unprogramming things that I thought about food and approaches to food that I've had for decades. And how does this incorporate into my life? And now I'm going to Kauai for 2 weeks. Am I going to be like stressed about this, or am I just going to go and come back to, like it's been not even the physical, but approaching it with this like grace, and I want to do this for the long term and create it ritualistically rather than a diet that I'm going to be on for 3 months to get my body in shape before I go back to the way I was living, right? It's like, okay, so one step at a time, like what's working, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, which it's been fun processing that. And what comes up for me with even protein, like I've always been told I need more protein. And I've had this aha recently, even about like, I have a resistance to feeling full. I think it is. And it's from a long history of not great relationships with food, but what is going on there? How can I heal that and realize that protein is supporting my body and like rebuilding and being strong? And it's bringing up a lot, but I'm in it. I'm in all of the things right now of like healing and getting back to myself for the long term. So yeah, in all the ways, like you take a really nice approach, and it's so like I have my protocols here, like you've got it all like written out, it's explained so well, there's different options. And even with the beef liver, because that's such like a nutrient dense food, right? And I love beef liver, like British, we were raised on pate, but at the same time having it daily doesn't appeal to me in any way, shape, or form. So it's like having the supplements, but then also Oh my gosh, there's the meat that's got it ground in there, right? So you've got your ground beef, but then you've also got the liver like hidden in there, which I found is very appropriate for not only myself, but like you said, incorporating it for my family. So I'm just carrying these healthy habits into the way that I am like nourishing my family at the same time. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
so good. So good. Do you have other fun stories, maybe one or two about other women whose lives you've just really helped transform?
Yeah, I have worked with a lot of women in the postmenopausal season. And what's interesting about working with clients in that season of life is that they are coming from 20, 30, sometimes 40 years of a lot of issues. And it's all of a sudden piled on, and they are now experiencing a whole host of symptoms in their 60s or whatever that looks like for them. And so there really is, and the other thing with that season of life is that women are only given one option. If you have hormone issues, if you have symptoms, you get on hormone replacement therapy. That's their only option that they're given. And the women who intuitively know that doesn't feel right, that's where they end up finding me. And it really becomes an opportunity for them to deprogram, like you said, everything that they've kind of been taught throughout that 30, 40 years of their life, and start to shift their mindset on how to really approach their body in a season of life that could make a huge difference on the longevity of their life as well. And so one of the clients that I've been working with one-on-one for the last just about 10 months, she came to me not sleeping. She has never had a daily bowel movement in like 30 years, which is crazy to me.
I know, right?
She was on thyroid medication for 10 years. She was on vitamin D supplements for 5 to 6 years, which we can talk about that and why I don't agree with that. And she started to feel a lot of aches and pains. She was told that there's these hormone imbalances and that she was absolutely going to need to get on hormone replacement therapy. And she wanted to also lose some weight because as many women do face, losing weight is a little bit harder, or managing weight can be a little bit harder in that season. And she was really struggling with her body image. And it took a good 9 months for her to really have that mindset shift when it comes to how to approach her body. But over the course of working together, within the first month, she was having a daily bowel movement, literally from just incorporating salt and potassium rich foods.
Oh, wow. It's amazing.
And that changed the game for her because literally she wasn't feeling as bloated and uncomfortable. She didn't feel like she didn't feel like she had to skip a meal because she was feeling bloated and uncomfortable. She felt like there was just a lot of good movement happening in her system to where things weren't getting backed up and toxins weren't getting recycled. She started sleeping, which was huge for her because she has a very demanding traveling job, and sleep just really impacts everything in life. And so the fact that she was able to get good night's rest also felt like her body was moving in a good healing direction. When it came to her results, like any client I've seen, those electrolytes were a big one in the first place that we started. But what I also noticed was very high iron. That was essentially impacting how her cells were able to produce energy, and absolutely was causing oxidative stress and an inflammatory cascade that was impacting her liver and her detoxification pathways. And so what I do when it comes to women in that season is we do start to work towards doing blood donations, because women have this beautiful physiological mechanisms where we get rid of excess iron on a monthly basis. But of course, when you move into that menopausal season, you no longer have that cycle. So things are naturally kind of building up in the body. And we had to really do a big educational deep dive as to where in our food system we are getting this excess iron, this fortified synthetic excess iron, how everywhere, exactly, how that's contributing to that oxidative stress, and why we need to start getting our iron recycling system back into a homeostasis, essentially. And blood donations were one of those mechanisms to help to do that. And once we started to get rid of that excess iron and really reestablish that healthy iron recycling system, she had no more joint pain. Wow. She had way more energy. She did start to lose a little bit of weight. Not to say that was the only mechanism to help with that weight management, but it certainly played a role. And so that was major for her. And now she is on a, her nutrition is her whole life now. Like, she loves to cook. She loves to nourish herself. She is very on top of blood sugar management. She always has her beef sticks and her adrenal cocktails when she's traveling, because she knows how important it is to make sure that she's nourishing herself, especially when in environments that's not always accessible. So she's being proactive in how to approach her health and her nourishment needs. And that in itself for her has made the biggest difference outside of the data, outside of my protocol, things like that. Weight is still an issue that she's struggling with a little bit, but it takes a very, very long time for the body to move out of feeling unsafe. There's been decades and decades and decades of stress and mineral dysregulation. The body moves into a conservation mode, and it doesn't feel safe. And so it's literally a protective mechanism that the body is trying to make sure that it has what it needs to keep itself going. And to move out of that level of unsafety into a nourished environment where it can finally just relax, that takes a lot of time. And it's not, sometimes it can take 9 months, sometimes it can take a year, sometimes it takes more than that. It took me about 2 years before my body was really in a good healing position. And for her, that's definitely difficult, but she has that foundation and that mindset that has enabled her to understand why it is her body is still in this position. And she's motivated to continue down this track of sustainable health, knowing that her body will shift when it's ready. And that to me is huge.
I love that. Well, the nutrition is her life. It's awesome, but it's so funny that any of us can say that nutrition isn't our life, right? And it is the way that we're set up in the world. You had mentioned, I want to know what you think about vitamin D, but I'm curious, not curious, but I'd like you to share just we were talking I'm like, sometimes I just like to go to Costco and get their quiche, or like, I don't want to make everything from scratch all the time. I do, but I don't have time to. But will you just talk a little bit about where the food system is and the fact that fortification and is being added to everything as a positive, like it's marketed like as a positive way, but what it's actually doing to our bodies?
Yeah, I think one really good example is, of course, wheat, and the gluten intolerance or sensitivity issues that we see in today's world. What ultimately happened is, we changed the source of our wheat. We use a winter wheat that has a higher gluten level. So that plays into some of the issues that people have when it comes to gluten intolerance. But what I really think is the issue is the fortification of nutrients. Essentially, the wheat goes through such a intense process of being stripped of its nutrient value, and it's being grown on soil that is completely deficient of nutrients to begin with, largely due to pesticides and glyphosate, which binds up copper, binds up magnesium, binds up the nutrients that actually give that wheat a nutritional value. And so because that soil and that processing remove all of those nutrients, they then add in synthetic isolated nutrients and then market it as something positive. really that's just another moneymaker. It's just another industry that enables our large food companies to make more money. Like I said, they are isolated nutrients, which is problematic in itself because minerals and vitamins are either synergistic or they're antagonistic. And they all have important cofactors that work hand in hand for us to be able to actually metabolize and use them appropriately, which is why I take on such a whole food approach. And then, of course, there is that fortification. So when we talk about iron specifically, we as humans have an iron recycling system where we need about 25 milligrams of iron to literally keep us alive. It's what allows our red blood cells to be reproduced, to get recycled, to bring oxygen to the various tissues of our body. And we get 24 milligrams being recycled within that system, and we're only supposed to get 1 milligram from food, which is not hard to do if you're eating a good whole food diet. But the problem is that the fortification of wheat and the fortification of other food items has an insane amount of iron in it. And that increases the amount of external iron that we are bringing into the system in a body and environment that is very low in other nutrients that actually allow that iron to get used properly. So going back to your daughter, where she was diagnosed as low iron, that is a huge misconception in terms of understanding how iron works in the body, because when they test for iron, they're only looking at one marker that's in the blood. But what happens is when we start to get this external amount of iron into the system, the body is actually, as a protective mechanism, going to start sequestering that iron and moving it into the tissues of our body. So it shows up as low in the blood, but it's actually accumulating in our tissues, causing oxidative stress. And the reason why the body does that is because that unbound iron, and I can go into what that means, but that unbound iron essentially is a feeding ground for pathogens, for viruses, for bacteria, for fungus. And so the body's going to sequester that to not give that environment to those pathogens, but then it comes up as low iron on a standard blood test. So this iron fortification program that literally happened back in like the 40s and 50s increase the amount of iron that we were consuming by eating bread and pasta and crackers and all those processed products that now people can't even consume because they're gluten intolerant. But I think that it's actually an iron issue. And then, of course, all of our wheat is also sprayed with folic acid, which we also can't metabolize because we don't have the methylation to be able to do so. So that's a whole other issue in itself. But
oh man.
So it really comes down to the fact that our food system has moved in a direction of stripping the nutrients and then, as a profit mechanism, adding in synthetic isolated nutrients that we cannot metabolize, and we are getting in excess amount that is depleting our mineral status internally in the body. So
interesting.
Trying to put that
yeah, I mean, it sounds complex, but really it's like get rid of all of the extra processed foods, like, and bring it back to high quality foods, right? And then you're left with this palette of beautiful, well-grown, organic, high quality products to choose from. And it's still a plethora of options. And yeah, and work with Carlynn because she'll help like set you up for success.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned it, like as a mother, like you're not always going to be able to make things homemade. It's not always realistic for a lot of people. Eating organically and highest quality is also very expensive in our country. But when you start to look at food labels and you see that a thing of bread or a quiche has 50 ingredients, that's the red flag. That's the red flag. Yeah. So opt for the other processed food that maybe comes from a little bit better of a resource that has maybe like 10 ingredients, and that in itself can be a step forward. But it does come down to having that conscious understanding of our food system and being able to take that that step to actually reading labels and to
Yeah.
understand what you are consuming. And that's a big thing in itself for people.
Yeah. Well, and two, I think having like easy, ready to go meals at your like fingertips, like more and more, I'm like, I could tell myself the story that I don't have time, but now more and more, I think it through at the beginning of the week or at the beginning of each day. And sometimes it's like eggs on a baked sweet potato or right. Like it doesn't have to be complex with your herbs and spices. Like there's a framework where food doesn't have to become this like overwhelming thing. And I get it in the process of the world with all of the things that we're balancing, it's another thing. But like adding that mindset of like food can be beautiful and it empowers like the basis for our entire lives. Like our physical body, for everyone who knows me, it's like our root chakra. Like it's building your house on like solid ground so that you can thrive in the rest of your life. So it's worth the energy and connectedness, right? So I'm curious, is there a few things that you just really love to keep yourself balanced in all senses?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes down to the basics, honestly. Prioritizing sleep, getting ample actual sunlight, engaging with nature is a big one. Daily movement, consuming whole food, spirituality, trusting the body. But the biggest one is living in alignment with female physiology, because we live in a male structured world that is based off male physiology, not female physiology. And so that requires a major mindset for women to really understand how their bodies work and how that works within their life and environment. How does that work within their professional life? How does that work within their personal life? And making small shifts towards working in alignment with your own cycle in a lot of ways. But I honestly, like, the biggest, even just coming back from my trip, the biggest thing for me was making breakfast this morning and making sure that I started off my day nourishing myself. And it's like a meditative practice for me. Like I cook in silence. I get to use my hands. I get to be creative. It's art for me.
Yeah.
But I also know the back end as to why that is so important, why it's important to eat a nutrient dense breakfast within an hour of waking up. How that sets the stage for my blood sugar for the rest of the day, how that sets the stage for my circadian rhythm, how that sets the stage for my hormonal landscape. And so that in itself for me has actually been one of the biggest game changers, is literally eating breakfast.
Love it. Yes, it doesn't have to be fancy. It's like putting beauty in the things that you're doing anyway, but actually means so much. Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
You mentioned vitamin D there again. I'm just curious because we live in North Idaho. Everyone's taking a vitamin D supplement or been told to. Will you just give us your like quick pitch on thoughts on what is like vitamin D supplements doing for our bodies? Or not doing?
It's more of like what it's not doing. Okay. So vitamin D in itself is an external nutrient that does not go through the natural physiological processes that it needs to for our body to actually use it. That's like the major point.
Gotcha.
When we get sunlight, it goes through a process through our skin, through our eyes, that gets converted in a way that gets actually turned into the vitamin, or really a hormone that we utilize in the system. When we eat animal foods, where we also can get vitamin D3, that has already gone through that natural conversion process in the animal. And that's why we're able to then utilize it. When we take a vitamin D3 supplement, it depletes us of potassium. It depletes us of magnesium. Vitamin D3 and retinol, which is the animal form of vitamin A, are biological partners. We need more vitamin A than D in order to actually convert vitamin D. But what happens is when we overload our system with an external source of vitamin D3, it actually blocks the receptors for us to uptake retinol. which is because
Interesting.
retinol deficiency is one of the largest issues that women face when it comes to their hormone health. It's one of the largest contributors to and fertility issues. And so we need to be sourcing vitamin D3 strictly through food and through sunlight. If you are going to take a supplement form, it just has to come through a whole food source. And the best form that has ancestrally and historically been used is cod liver oil, because cod liver oil has the appropriate ratio of vitamin A to vitamin D. And again, it's in a whole food form. It's why maybe the grandmothers in our past have, told us that we needed cod liver oil. It's because they've known, and a lot of the Nordic ancestral communities used to consume things like cod liver oil in order to actually maintain that vitamin D status. But vitamin D status is also very much based off your magnesium status. It's based off that retinol status. And so it's not just going to be this simple take a pill and your levels will increase. It just doesn't work like that. The body does not work like that. And the other issue is that when you go to test your vitamin D levels, they are only testing your storage, or excuse me, your storage form of vitamin D, but they're not testing your active form of vitamin D. And so we're not getting full vitamin D understanding through the basic standard testing. And then there's also the measurements that they use and the standard that they have. That's also not correct.
Yeah. I love that piece though so much. It's like the theme of everything. The word holistic can get overused, but we're holistic beings, right? It's like you can't just pinpoint something and be like, I'm just going to throw money, supplements, whatever at you. It's the bigger picture because it's all playing off of each other. And it's this like beautiful living being, whether it's like the minerals or mind, body, soul, spirit. Like you can't just attack one and think that you're going to ignore the other ones, because that's not how we work, Right. So good. So good. So I could talk to you all day, and I'm going to listen to this episode over and over again to be like, okay, what did she say about vitamin D? What did she say? And you have so many resources, even through your own website, from different videos that you've recorded. And so I encourage people to go there too. I'll put it in the show notes. But how do people work with you? What are the different ways that you offer for women to work with you?
Yeah, so obviously I do offer one-on-one coaching, which, it looks like either 3 months or 6 months. And that's just really for the individual that needs a little bit more hand-holding and a little bit more TLC in this process. And I do encourage a lot of women, especially if they are moving kind of from that maiden to motherhood, to do more of that one-on-one, because it requires a lot of that time. And that's a program that I'm actually kind of in the works of creating right now. So I'm excited for that. But my basic package, like I kind of had shared before, is just starting with a hair test and seeing what your cellular health looks like, and seeing what those electrolytes look like, and just kind of starting there. So I do offer free 30-minute consultations to get a sense as to kind of what the individual's health concerns and goals are, and to get a better understanding of my services and to make sure we're a good fit. And then the idea is that a hair test kit is sent to you. I give you all the instructions to make sure you feel confident doing that at home, but it is important for you to do that on your own. Mm-hmm. That gets sent into a lab. I then get the results. We go through a fairly deep health history deep dive, again, to map out that stress timeline. And then eventually we do a mineral review process. And so, that timeline can look very different depending on the individual's schedule. But then there is also a 30-minute follow-up consult to just make sure that the nutritional protocol, the supplement protocol, if that's offered, and just any of the information that I've shared and provided as suggestions, is the client's feeling confident with. And then I kind of let them go off from there, and take that on into their life in the way that they see fit. Yeah. And the idea is that, you do come and retest depending on, again, the individual within a 6 to 9 month timeline, because it is important to really see those changes to make sure that things are moving in a positive direction. We didn't talk about it, but heavy metal toxicity is another component to that hair test. Mm-hmm. And that those pattern changes are really important to see, which is why the retesting is important. So that's kind of the basic package. And then I have the full Monty package, which is really that full Monty blood panel that we talked about when it comes to iron copper status alongside the hair test. And the two together are the most comprehensive lens into one's mineral status. And so that to me is a great package for those that are really, really struggling with their health in some way, or are looking to maybe move into that motherhood season and want to be as proactive as possible. And so it really just depends on kind of where the client is at, both financially and mentally and emotionally, and what they're looking to achieve. But those are ultimately the three packages that I offer.
I love that. I honestly don't know that anyone wouldn't benefit from getting the hair test, working with you one-on-one, because I think in the world that we're living in, like you said, we didn't get into heavy metals, but when it's in a million products that women use before even like 8 a.m. in the morning, when it's in like water, it's in just in the world that we're living in with the food the way it is, with this being not a go-to nutritional approach for Western society, I just think this would be such a benefit for everyone. And I think having you hold space for them, be able to ask questions, hold them accountable, like that piece of having the coach to give you all of this information so clearly like you do, but then to be like, okay, that isn't working for you, or just asking the questions like, how is your gut responding, and helping them connect with what is working, what isn't working in the rituals and the foods that they're having. Yes. So anyway, 100% recommend everything that you just said. And like you said, it depends on where they're at in life and financially, but I'm sure one of the ways would work for everybody. So highly recommend it. So what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, I would say my website, carlynnchristinewellness.com, is the best place to reach out if you're interested in a free consultation. As you said, there are multiple free resources that's on the website as well. I do offer a weekly Nourish newsletter that gives pretty educational deep dives on minerals and hormones. My Instagram, I've been a little lackadaisical on it in the last couple of months.
Getting married and traveling the world, you mean? Like living your life.
But I do plan to get back on there and continue to share, as much education as possible through that platform. I'm considering even creating a YouTube channel because I really have this drive to be more of an educator and to just provide this mineral mindset to as many women as possible. So Instagram, my website, best places to connect. And then, just keep an ear out for potential YouTube channel.
Yeah, perfect. And I'll put all of that in the show notes as well. Is there anything that you want to mention before I move into our final question?
I really, what I really like about the hair test, which is not something we've really touched on, is not only does it provide that cellular lens, but we can get insight into the different metabolic systems within one test. So we can get insight on how your thyroid's operating, how your adrenals are operating, what your gut health looks like, how your liver is operating, all within one test. Versus when I have moved through the functional lab testing myself for my own healing and health journey, it's like you have to buy all of these separate tests in order to understand what's going on, and they're very expensive. So that's why I was so attracted to learning about how to interpret hair tests, is because it really gave us a good overall picture of the metabolic system in a very affordable way. So just wanted to share that as well.
Yeah. Well, and even that information is overwhelming, but beyond the results of that, you then take it and break it down into, maybe you don't need to understand all of those numbers, but here's your action steps, right? Because some people are more numbersy than I am, but I'm like, basically I was like, red alert, I'm depleted, what do I do? And then I could just focus on like one step at a time, and you laid that out for me, which was amazing. So
yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, I like to end with the question. So by my definition of vibrant, which is glowing from the inside out, which a couple of people or organizations locally or in general actually have inspired you on your journey?
Dr. Bonita Hazel.
Love
She,
her.
yeah, she's a craniosacral chiropractor who works with the nervous system, and she has such a gentle approach to the work. And I have had tremendous benefit in working with her when I've moved through some pretty stressful seasons in life. So I can't recommend her enough. Karmen Gregg at Selkirk Women's Health, which is a newer women's health clinic here in town. She also is just such a passionate practitioner who is really wanting to bring more education and support for women in the community. And then, I mean, I could list a number of farmers and homesteaders working so hard to provide our local community with regenerative food options. But that is where I give a lot of props towards, is those farmers who are regenerating the soil and trying to create options, local options where people can get good quality food, and really are working towards creating a healthier earth in general. And so I give my huge gratitude towards anyone who.
Yeah. Well, and I love that. Like that's case in point. Like go to the farmers markets, get out there. There are options. Like there's plenty across this whole region, whether it's Montana, Sandpoint, and beyond, where people are doing amazing work, farmers specifically, people in general, but yes.
We're really blessed and privileged to have that in our area, because that's not the case around the country.
Right.
So it really is, it's huge for this community. So that is what I definitely want to inspire people to do more of, is to connect with their food more, connect to where they are getting their food and how they can start to make small steps in towards really reducing that supply chain as much as possible.
Beautiful. Well said. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Carlynn. You are a gem. And yes, I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been such an honor, and I can't wait to connect more with you.